My father ended up with some health complications from a surgery and temporarily found himself in a wheelchair. Can't get him up to the bedroom. He's got a big spiral staircase, can't get him upstairs. He basically lived on a couch for a couple of months. And believe it or not, within about 2 weeks, we were approached with the idea of a mobility company.
I think it was probably month 1 or 2. We realized immediately that this was going to be all hands on deck.
We ended up having to break one lease and sign another one within the first month of our startup business.
Welcome to the Franchise Champion Show. I'm your host, Alan Regala, CEO and founder of Athlete to Owner Franchise Coaching. I was a D1 athlete and used the principles of high performance training to build and sell a multi-million-dollar franchise business. And now I want to help others do the same. So let's go. Our next guests are a husband and wife team who were multi-million-dollar top performers in their previous franchise business, 101 Mobility. After taking some time off, they're now back in the industry and ready to dominate as a franchisor with their new company, Liftology. Welcome to the Franchise Champion Show, Jennifer and Gordon Raney.
Thanks, Alan. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to chat with you guys. Let's start off with this. How did you originally get into franchising?
As an owner on the franchise side, it's actually interesting. So we may have a background pretty similar to, maybe a lot of your customers. We had the corporate backgrounds. I was a CPA, MBA, kind of a finance and accounting person overall. Jen has, sales and marketing, also an accounting background. Out of college, you go the Fortune 500 company route and you get the office job and the desk job and you think that's what you want. And then maybe that changes over time and you figure out something that's better. So, we're not your typical entrepreneurs, most likely. I'm actually fairly risk averse at the end of the day and fairly methodical and calculated. And so it was hard for us a little bit to get into the franchise mindset. Well, we knew we were about 30 at that point in time and we had great jobs. And the jobs were so good that no one ever left these companies and there wasn't any advancement and there wasn't any opportunity to kind of make more out of that situation. So we said, well, let's start looking around at franchise opportunities and we approached a broker and we were getting submitted a lot of different opportunities and none of them really kind of clicked with what we were looking for and what we were thinking for. And honestly, we probably didn't even know what we were looking for. But an odd thing kind of happened, on the personal side. My father ended up with some health complications from a surgery and temporarily found himself in a wheelchair. And so I go out to North Carolina and it's a unique situation. He finally comes home from the hospital, can't get him up to the bedroom. He's got a big spiral staircase, can't get him upstairs. The bathrooms are up there. I don't know what to do with him. I've never heard of these types of products. The mobility industry and the products were very new at that point in time. So, we struggled through that. We had nurses come in a couple times a day and help him out. And he basically lived on a couch for a couple of months. So, we kind of got that stabilized and we came back to Dallas. And believe it or not, within about 2 weeks, we were approached with the idea of a mobility company. And at that point, there were no other options. 101 Mobility was the group that was, kind of pioneering this industry. And we said, this makes sense. Like, we literally just went through this for the last couple of months and we basically had no one to help us and no answers and no ideas of what the solution was. So I absolutely kind of see the need for it. And that was the light bulb moment for us. This is what we need to strongly go after. So that's kind of how it happened. And then, it's not like it was part of the overall plan. It's an industry that we knew nothing about or was probably fairly far from what we thought we'd be doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The timing of that, going through that personal experience, with your family to see, I guess, to really establish the need for it, beforehand and see what life looks like without this type of service and then having it presented to you or fall into your lap, right afterwards.
I mean, it basically hit us over the head. It's what it did. I mean, it got, but it made perfect sense in the moment. And, we quickly kind of jumped into the operation there and it immediately took off.
Yeah, we actually Alan, our original goal was that Gordon would step into one-on-one mobility and that I would stay, and keep my main job and, keep our insurance and that sort of thing that, people always worry about. And I think it was probably month 1 or 2, we realized immediately that this was going to be all hands on deck, that, this was going to go. It was going to be big. It was going to be busy. And so I stepped out as well and joined Gordon full-time almost immediately. And then, we worked together the remainder of that time and have ever since.
Wow. Okay, so that's really interesting. It sounds like the plan initially was for Gordon to start full-time and you were going to stay at your job, Jennifer. And what exactly was happening in the business that made you feel like you needed to jump ship? And what was happening in a way that, you jumped ship because you're like, hey, there's so much work to be done here and I need to help and provide that support? Or was it like you see the growth potential of this and you're like, oh, I know this is going to eventually, pay me to be, in the business and this is going to support me and replace my income, basically?
I think all of the above. I think we were open, absolutely, and interested in both, exiting the corporate role and moving into, our own business. But like I said, a lot of people, us included, it's a big jump, giving up both salaries at one time, giving up your health insurance and all the things. And so I think really the minute that we could see the opportunity, we knew it. We'd done a lot of analysis, a lot of research. Gordon actually did M&A due diligence for a number of years in his role. And so he had, evaluated companies financially. And so we had done all of that ahead of time. We felt really comfortable about it, but we didn't realize probably how quickly that we felt like it would go, that we could see this is going to happen. This is going to pay our bills. It's going to grow. This is going to be, what we do moving forward. And so I think the minute that we really could see that, number one, it was so busy that Gordon needed help quickly. And number two, we could see the opportunity really was like, this will outpace, our day jobs pretty quickly here. And so we felt comfortable to say, let's go all in and do it. So yeah.
That's incredible. I understand. I get that when a business is so busy that you just need help and support. But to be able to see so early on the potential of the business and the opportunity that's there, and then to make that leap, that's quite a leap.
It is. And we got really busy really quickly. So like I said, we could see the opportunity, the calls of the opportunities that were coming in. We could see the scale of that and feel comfortable that would be pretty quickly leaving us in a good position, if we both stepped out at the same time. So,
all right. So it sounds like, Jennifer, you jumped ship shortly after Gordon jumped ship to start this business. That is not a lot of time to see how things go before, leaving your job. Most people, in an ideal situation, you've waited some time, the business is up and running and, you've made some income so that you can justify leaving your job. So that must have been a really scary thing.
It wasn't terrible. And like I said, we were open to the idea. So it wasn't like it just came as a shock. Certainly our maybe long-term goal was that we'd both step out and do it together. So really for us, it was great news, to be able to do that pretty quickly. So we were excited about it. We were comfortable and honestly, we did it. We never looked back.
That's awesome. So, okay. So what was that like, your first couple of years in business, your first year?
It was all new learning experiences across the board for us. We kind of had the corporate backgrounds, but now, decisions matter a lot more when it's your own business. And, we were fortunate enough that we had a lot of early demand. A lot of what became hectic for us was we ended up having to cover a much bigger area than we ever envisioned. And that's actually kind of what fueled our growth and how we ended up, eventually we were in, 3 states with 4 physical offices, and we were even servicing some other states. But, that wasn't exactly the plan initially. That's where the demand for this product type was. And there's not a lot of people kind of performing this work. And it is a little bit of a niche product, especially back then. Now it's becoming more mainstream now, but, we were in Texas and it wasn't unheard of for somebody in Oklahoma to call us, or somebody in Arkansas or Missouri to call us, because, even being 1 or 2 states away, you're still kind of the closest provider of certain brands and certain products, and are able to do certain installations that other people can't. So that kind of created a lot of the hectic nature, as we were honestly growing a little bit too fast. And we kind of made some decisions, like even our initial office space, we kind of had a 1-room office, and we had some storage units and things like that, and we thought that would last for a while. And a month later, we're moving into a bigger warehouse, because we just realized very quickly that wasn't going to get it done. So we ended up having to break one lease and sign another one within the first month of our startup business. But that's good problems to have. You want to have the phones ringing and people calling and jobs to actually get into. But it was much faster than anticipated, I'll admit that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is a fantastic problem to have when you've got the demand side is there, for sure. Let's take a step back and just tell us a little bit about this industry and what the services you guys are actually providing.
Yeah. We refer to it as just mobility equipment. A lot of people don't know what that is. We get a lot of folks that think, oh, you do cell phones. It's a completely different industry. But what it is we're providing solutions, and it's usually a product that goes with that involves an installation. But we're providing a solution to somebody who's got a physical challenge in their home, a barrier that they're trying to overcome. So a lot of people, it's very common, stairs are an issue for a lot of different reasons. So stair lifts are a big product of ours, wheelchair ramps. You get into small elevator systems and even full-on home elevator systems for people who you need to have a different application. There's patient lifts, things that were previously only used in the commercial space. Hospitals, they have a lot of overhead tracks and rail systems and patient lifts, but we're in a situation where we can provide that in a residential setting. So it's products that have been around for a little bit, but a lot of people still don't know about them. They don't know the terminology of what to call these. A lot of people don't know to go to Google and type in stair lift. I need a stair lift. What they know is that they have a hard time with their stairs. They don't know what product fixes that. They just know that they can't get up and down their stairs. So it can play out in a variety of different applications, from homes. We do a lot of schools, churches. You get into actual office buildings. If you have to have ADA compliance for a building, you have to have some solutions to maybe modify or retrofit those buildings to make it work for the general public. Or maybe you've got a very specific employee or a customer that is in that space on a regular basis that you have to kind of account for. So it's a vastly maybe not fully understood industry, but it's a growing industry, and there's still a lot of growth to go. When we got into this industry, we were at the very front end. This was about 2012, 2013, and that was kind of the first group of baby boomers hitting 65, and everybody knew the stats. And it was like 10,000 people a day are turning 65, and that's a really big number. Well, what we learned back then was we were kind of out in front of that curve a little bit, because 65-year-olds, they're still in pretty good shape in a lot of scenarios. They may not necessarily need our products. It's more like 75 to 80-year-olds are kind of more the sweet spot for some of the products. So, we spent a lot of time educating people. They didn't know the product exists. We're trying to teach them it exists. Didn't have a lot of competition at that point in time, which has certainly changed now. But that's a good thing, having other people in the industry. It's bringing awareness to a category, and a group like ours certainly takes advantage of more people being aware of just the products and the industry in general. So, we look at it as we're still at the front end of this. We got in 10, 12 years ago, got out, but now we're coming back, and we're still at the front end of this baby boomer age wave. Now it's all these people are turning 75 and 80 years old. So we still, we know for a fact pretty much that we've got a 20, 25-year runway in front of us from this point forward. And that's one of the things we really like about the industry, just from the investment side, is there's a lot of certainty in the growth of these numbers. It's not like we're guessing and hoping the demand will be there. We know exactly how many 80-year-olds there's going to be 7 years from now because they were born 73 years ago. We tell people it's the future that's already happened. You kind of understand what the demand is going to be. And so we're still at the very front edge of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've recently been going, looking into this myself for my parents. My dad is in his 80s. My mom is as well, but he had surgery recently, and, we, brought him home, and he's like, oh, well, they have stairs in their house. It's like, well, he's not going to be going up those stairs. So it's like, we got some temporary solutions, but what's the long-term play here? We don't want him to be in a house with stairs, or either of them, to be in a house with stairs. So, this is a conversation, my brother and I are having is, all right, well, what are the options, looking at, modifying the house that they're in versus, having to move and live somewhere else that's, one story, or, and so, and can we retrofit, the stairs that he has, or is it an elevator, or, what are the possibilities here?
Yeah. And a lot of times it's way simpler than people envision. That question that you're dealing with is something that most of our customers are potentially thinking about. They've potentially been trained or told, or, it's just kind of been common logic that as you get older, maybe you need to move to a different house or something that's a one story. And maybe that's true for some people, but not necessarily for everybody. When we're talking to a customer in their home and they're saying, well, I don't want to move out, but I might move to some kind of nursing facility or assisted living facility because, they think that that's safer. And, in my mind, I say, well, think about this. Those facilities are $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 a month sometimes. In some situations, a simple product like a straight stair lift, that's $4,000. And maybe that fixes your issues and makes those stairs completely safe for you. You're going to get your money back in 1 month, and you're going to basically get to stay in your own home. So it has you break even real quickly if you can kind of explain that math and that logic to people. And, maybe that gets them in their own home for another couple years. Maybe it gets them for a long time. So it can be an absolutely a cost-effective option. Some people will do the renovations to the bedrooms and the bathrooms and the kitchens, and that makes perfect sense. It's probably still cheaper than moving into some kind of facility or having to actually move. So, that's an eye-opener that a lot of people don't understand, is you do not have to move out of your house. And literally, there may be a solution that could take place in, tomorrow with a 4-hour installation that fixes an issue that you've been struggling with for a long time. We see customers who haven't been to the second story of their house in 10 years, and you put that lift in and you train them and they ride it up for the very first time, and then they start crying. And then, of course, then I'm crying and everybody else is crying. But it happens. They've struggled for 10 years without knowing what to do. And within 4 hours and, a decent price point, you can make that go away for them. So it's very rewarding work as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty incredible, given how much it does cost to be in one of these communities where you're spending, like you said, $8,000 a month or whatever. It makes sense dollars wise. It sounds like oftentimes to be able to modify the house. And I mean, let's be honest, I think people would just prefer to be in their home as long as they can. Anyways.
I think there's been some studies and surveys in the last couple of years, as people are tracking, the boomers and the aging population. And I think it's 90% of them surveyed said they want to stay at home. Now, like you said, that may not be forever. Gordon kind of mentioned that. But 5 or 10 years down the road, there may be other things that make it unsafe for them to be living alone at home. But for a lot of people, it's a pretty quick solution that may be an option, or at least should be in the discussion, right? If you're evaluating moving to a one story, if you're evaluating moving to, an assisted living, this should at least be in the conversation of, here's an alternate option, that is, when you really think about the big picture, it's pretty cost effective relative to, paying for, nursing homes or independent living every month. compared to moving, just the actual moving cost alone, you'll come out ahead. So it's definitely should be in the conversation, and most of the time can be a really good solution, at least for a period of time that makes sense. Like keeps people, that's what you want. You want your dad to be happy and be home and be where they want to be, where their memories are and just what feels comfortable for them. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, in my business, I was a Shelf Genie franchisee for 14 years, and it was really the same thing. It's how can we help people to live longer in their homes, and people would prefer that over anything else.
As long as they would like to, and that it feasibly, continues to work, what better could you offer somebody?
Yeah.
It's honestly, we're seeing stats that just the number of beds that are available in kind of the nursing facilities and the assisted living and the construction pipeline that is on that side of real estate, it's actually not keeping up with the demand. It's not keeping up with the volume of people that are kind of aging and progressing into these scenarios. So there's actually going to be a fairly big shortfall of kind of nursing facility beds to even potentially somebody to move to. So, a lot of people may be, they want to stay in their home, but they may not have another option to stay in their home just because of that lack of supply.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Okay. So I would like to transition to kind of what you guys are doing now, but first we got to hear how you guys got here. So 101 Mobility is where you started, and things were going great. They were exploding. You're in multiple states. You got multiple offices. Like, how long were you in the business in this particular brand? And I guess, how long were you in this business, and where did you end up with, let's say, revenue wise?
Yeah, we were in our ninth year when kind of the exit scenario happened. And that wasn't us actually pursuing an exit at all. It kind of came out of nowhere to us. I was literally, when the group approached us, I told them, I said, we've got 2 months to figure this out if this is going to happen, because I have a lease on my desk and I'm about to open a 5th office and I'm ready to sign this thing and move forward. So we were still very much so engaged. We were very much in growing more and bigger and kind of filling out our territories. But from the business side of it, when someone calls and says, hey, I'd like to talk about acquiring your business, you have to have that conversation. And that had happened numerous times over the years, where somebody, likes one of my territories and thinks that they want to kind of get into the business. So, there's 3 or 4 times a year that conversation was having for a piece of the business. This group just happened to, want to take the whole thing. But we were still, we were in the $4 million revenue range at that point in time, and still growing at, more than 25% a year at that point. And honestly, still uncovering new markets. We had just kind of tapped into commercial spaces and different applications that you can put these products into as well. So that was growing even faster. So, 9 years into it, it was still almost like a year 2 type of business with the growth and opportunity and the different things you could get into.
That's incredible. So, your business was doing really, really well, still growing. And it sounds like you weren't even, trying to sell the business. This was you guys being asked, someone interested in buying the business. So tell us how that went.
Well, it was interesting. We were at Christmas Eve dinner, my wife and I, and Dave, our partner now in Liftology, calls and says, hey, I know some folks who are interested in acquiring your business. I said, well, it's not for sale. We're literally about to open a new office. He said, well, at least have the conversation. So we did. And it seemed like a fairly good opportunity for us to honestly, maybe we could sell the business, but we could continue on in the industry and even in the same system. We were going to go back and be corporate employees and kind of trainers and business coaches for the entire corporate system. That was the goal and the intention, and that's what kind of got us comfortable with it, because we love the work. One of the things that happened over the years, and then we certainly noticed it once we did exit the initial business there, is how much this work actually means to you and how important it is. Maybe initially early on, it was more of an investment and an income and an opportunity, but over time, you really start to, have customers that you love and you want to take good care of, and you realize what it means to certain people's lives. So being able to stay in the industry was the plan for us and continue that work. The odd thing that happened just timing wise is that kind of COVID was very shortly after selling the business, and the offices, they did get shut down. Hospitals are closed. Our customers don't want strangers in their homes. So now you're having a hard time doing evaluations and even kind of looking and seeing what products can go in there. So it really, for a year, basically, it kind of changed the whole industry and allowed us not to really be able to operate at that point the way we wanted to. So that's what led to the ultimate going away from the industry. It wasn't really by choice. It wasn't our design at all, because it's a great industry with a lot of benefits.
If you're wondering if franchise ownership is right for you, I'd love to help. As a franchise coach, I work one-on-one with my clients to 1, find the perfect business match for their goals, skills, and investment level, and 2, help them prepare to be champions in their business. Here's the best part: my coaching services are completely free. To schedule a 15-minute introduction call, visit athlete2owner.com. The link is in the show notes. Now, back to our show. So you guys ended up selling the business, right? Now, the one-on-one mobility prior to them purchasing your particular business, was one-on-one mobility acquired by private equity before that?
The corporate office it was owned by private equity over the years, and they kind of made a decision that they were going to maybe get back into having some locations of their own. So they what they did was they essentially said, well, who's our biggest dealers, let's look at them, and that was us. So their intention was to kind of take over our operations, still keep the whole staff and everybody in place, including Jen and I. We become corporate employees. And then, our business that we had built kind of becomes the flagship model, almost like a demo model that they could use to potentially sell other territories. And to kind of, it's a proof of concept almost of, here's one that went start to finish, and look how well it's doing. So that was the intention of the kind of the corporate office and the private equity fund behind them.
Got it. And then unfortunately COVID happened, and your plans to stay and help out the corporate office got derailed, it sounds like.
Yeah, we say this
forced into retirement.
Yeah, what you said when we say that COVID was shortly thereafter, we're talking like 10 days later.
Wow.
So about 10 days, after we sold the business, COVID was sort of shutting the world down and just flipping everything upside down. So, lots of changes. So so we did.
Wow.
Probably a year after that, we stepped out of the industry and got bored pretty quickly.
Yeah. So Jennifer, tell us what happened, how long your retirement lasted there, and what you ended up doing.
Less than a month. We don't sit idle well. So we actually moved out of the Dallas area and up to Oklahoma, to a little small lake community. And we actually joined the Home Investors We Buy Ugly Houses franchise in that area. And so our goal really was to accumulate rental properties long term. And so their model is, flip and sell. And so we did definitely do some of that. But really our goal was to acquire long-term rental properties. So we did that for a couple of years till we pretty much met our goals. And then we moved up to Utah. Somewhere along that way, we got a little bit bored in rural Oklahoma and didn't need to go back to Dallas. So we started sort of exploring, and we made our way out to Utah on a trip, and 6 months later, we came full time. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a whirlwind, but, I think like a lot of people in COVID, we just had that opportunity, to sort of like shake things up and do something different. And so we did. When we got out here, we still have a real estate business. It's reasonably passive at this point. And so we got into a vending business out here that we started.
So then you got into another business.
We investigated in great detail, the couple of different vending franchise models that there were. We actually met with most of them in person. We probably took about a year or so to really evaluate those. And ultimately, we decided not to go with one of the formal franchises. We went with a different group. So we were all in on that. And then several months ago, we keep in touch with Dave, this whole time, of course. And several months ago,
And Dave, he's the founder. And tell us about Dave. Tell us who Dave is.
So Dave's the CEO of Liftology. Good enough that you.
No, Dave was the original founder and CEO of 101 Mobility back in the day. So truly, him and his partners, and some of those partners are still there at 101 Mobility. They're actually individual owners of locations at this point. They're not on the corporate side, but they saw the need and the unmet demand for selling these types of products, and it's just kind of a hole in the market. The durable medical equipment sellers that are out there are traditionally tied to Medicare and Medicaid and insurance reimbursement and kind of working that scenario, and they sell some lower ticket items. Most of them is just kind of cash and carry, or there's a billing and reimbursement piece to it. So, the piece that was being missed is kind of the larger, more complicated machinery and equipment that needs to be installed. I mean, some of this equipment is truly, regulated under elevators, and, your local mom and pop shop DME operation wanted no part of putting that in. So they just kind of stayed away from it. So Dave saw the demand there on the high end of the product lineup, and a business that it is a cash business. And that's something a lot of people don't understand about mobility equipment, is that it's not covered by insurance or Medicare or Medicaid. Right now they kind of deem these products a luxury item more so than a necessity. Now, our customers would 100% disagree with that. If you can't get up your stairs to get to your bedroom, that's a necessity.
That's a necessity.
It's not a luxury, but just the way it is at the current point in time, it is you have to pay out of pocket for that. So a lot of people said that'll never work, and he proved them wrong, and he built that system, and now he's working with us. He's the CEO of building Liftology, our new system here, because the demand is still there. Jen and I and Dave have all been gone from the industry for 4.5, 5 years, and we still get a couple calls a month from sometimes it's old customers. Sometimes it's friends and family. Sometimes it's friends of friends who, just need somebody to talk to about what products that, they should be considering or thinking about. And they're having a hard time finding anybody to kind of service that need. So, we've been seeing the demand even for the last 5 years. We've been doing some free consulting for a lot of people all over the country, honestly, of what they can do and what the solution is. And then we would try to help them find a local dealer that kind of met the need. And we even kind of vetted some dealers for some people just to make sure they're in good hands. But the demand kept growing. And even with an established system like 101 Mobility out there, there's still plenty of market for a new system like ours. And, that's not even taking into account the phenomenal growth rate the industry has.
Wow. So Dave obviously knows that you guys were top performers in the system and didn't necessarily want to get out of the industry, but things happened obviously with COVID and whatnot. And so you guys were sidelined and of course starting other businesses in the meantime. And so he comes back to you and says what? He says, "Hey guys, I want to do another mobility company." How does that work?
I mean, that's kind of what happened. At this point, the systems that are out there are mostly sold out of territories, to be honest. There's not a lot of open territory or cities. They get a ton of calls and it's closed. Somebody already owns it and they have maybe for a couple of years. So, really it kind of came from the broker network and community out there of, reaching out to Dave saying, "Hey, would you think about doing another system? Because we get a lot of interest from candidates in a mobility type of operation, but there's no available territories." So, that's what got the wheels turning in Dave's mind is, they were right. There is a lot of interest. We're seeing a lot of early interest right now, at the beginning months of our own system. We're already signing up people and having a ton of interest. So that's what generated it. And then, Dave said, "Well, let me find people in the industry who have actually been there and done that. And that's kind of how Jen and I came to the equation, which, as Jen mentioned earlier, it's a little bit unique. Every system we were in, there's a big sales component to the whole team there. They want to get you in the door. They want to sell you a franchise, and, they'll answer your questions real quick. But then once you're kind of in the door, maybe that support's not there. Now you got to fill out a ticket and we'll get back to you in 72 hours. And, there's not as much support there, especially support from people who know the industry, know how to operate an actual business, who know the products well. So we struggled with that at all the systems we were at of, once you're in, you're just kind of in, and maybe you're kind of left to your own devices sometimes of figuring out how to make this work. So we're absolutely taking the opposite approach with what we're building at Liftology. We don't have a big sales team. Jen and I are on the podcast here, but we're not salespeople. We're the coaches. We're the people you're going to work with on a daily basis after you've already joined the system and you need help, launching your business, scaling your business, thinking about new opportunities, thinking about expansion, even thinking about exiting the business at some point down the road. That's where we're going to come into play. So we're heavily focused with what happens on the back end once we get somebody in our system. And we're being fairly selective with who, the types of owners we want to see in our system. But we don't have the big sales machine that a lot of the other franchise systems out there have.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to say that I think this is the best kind of combination that you can have, really, with the franchisors. Someone like Dave, who has the experience of, running a franchise and growing the franchise, that the first one in the industry for 101, and then bringing you guys on as the top performers of that system, and being able to know from the operations standpoint how to run it, and which provides a lot of usefulness for franchisees. I mean, that's what they want, is they want to know, they want that support, and for people who've done it.
Yeah. And I think, in a lot of systems too, as an owner, once you're in a little bit, and if you dive in head first and you really learn the business, you outgrow your coaches, right? You know more than they do pretty quickly if they've not been there and done it. So that's something that, Gordon and I really hope to bring to the table, that we have been there, we have done it. We can look at your market from your perspective. We kind of laugh on the team, but, we wear the owner hat still, always. And everything that we do and every system we look at it through that lens of what does an owner need, to succeed here. And so I do think that's unique. The other thing I'm just going to kind of elaborate with Dave, when Dave called, like I said, we always have kept in touch with Dave. We've always had a great relationship, but we knew that we could work with Dave because, we've known Dave since probably 2012. We've always had a really great relationship, but, occasionally there's friction between a franchisor and the franchisee side of the table. And so Gordon sat on the franchise council. He was the president of the franchise council for 4 years. When he turned out, then I stepped in and joined the franchise council. And so, especially early on, we were some of the early owners in the 101 system. And we would sit with Dave, in the team, and we would brainstorm, and we would talk, and we would bring new ideas to the table. And we had the opportunity to really work closely with him as the system grew and bring him, challenges, concerns, issues from other owners. And occasionally we don't always see eye to eye on things, but we always had a good respect, a good working relationship. And we always came out, with a solution that worked for everybody. And so just that experience of really kind of sitting, opposite side of the table, but working with Dave all those years really kind of gave us, the comfort to say, we know that we can work with Dave and that we can do this all together. And we all kind of bring a different skill set to the table to kind of round out, what we're bringing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really cool. I like what you said about franchisees eventually, outgrowing, their coaches or, people that are supporting them sometimes with the franchisor. I definitely experienced that with my business. At a certain point, you're growing beyond, what it is for just, one territory or whatever. And it's like, there's no systems in place. There's no things in place for people that are going beyond that. So you end up having to create your own systems and processes. And then you're the one that's providing support to other franchisees looking to do the same thing, or trying to help the franchisor understand, how to handle this type of growth. What's great about what you guys bring to the table is that, you've experienced that already. And so you're a couple steps ahead already, so that when people, are growing and trying to scale their Liftology businesses, you're going to be able to provide that high level of support for growing a big business, which is fantastic, and even selling a business.
And that's how our model is kind of set up. We're ideally, most major markets might have one owner. Now, if it's a really big market, maybe it's got two owners, but there's a lot of owners out there that are going to have the entire state to themselves. We're not looking to go in and carve up a bunch of small territories and draw these weird circles on a map just so you can say there's 500,000 people and call it a territory. We want productive territories. We want owners who have a chance at, having some real success and getting big, and, they may be able to cover their whole state or multiple states. So, but yeah, like, we will be able to support that because we've done that, and it's a different level of support from getting somebody started into a $500,000 revenue number to getting somebody started and maybe they have a multi-million-dollar operation going that crosses state lines in certainly different territories. So that's what we want to see, is kind of fewer but much larger, more successful owners. That's what we did, and so we certainly can help guide along the way.
That's cool. That's great. I mean, I think that speaks to what you were saying earlier about finding the right owners, the right candidates, the right people to bring into the system, not just looking for anybody, but people that can hopefully perform at a high level and have that bigger territory, have the bigger business, which ideally would be great for them and less owners for you guys to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, there's a benefit to having, fewer people in the system, but, still having a fairly sizable built out system.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me, what did you learn from your previous experience in this industry that you're now applying to Liftology to help improve the business? Like, how are you making this different and better than where you guys were at before?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of gaps in the industry, and there's still a level of service that we don't find acceptable a lot of times across the industry. And so even, good dealers do not act as quickly, do not answer the phone as quickly, do not, they're not all in. And so that's something that we think is really important, just the client experience, not just transactional, but, not salesy, listening, consulting, finding the right solution. And sometimes it's possible, like you talked about earlier, maybe we're not the right solution. Maybe, maybe this client should move somewhere else. And so we will say that, we're not here to, to be overly salesy. We're here to be consultative, to work with people, to understand their needs, their goals, and what we can do to solve that. But we're here to be responsive, to answer the phones quickly, to get out, to your home and visit with you and your dad and see what's going on and act extremely quickly, with high ethics. Of course, we're going to bring the best brands to the table. That's really important to us. So we have circled back to, all of the manufacturers that we feel like are the strongest in each category. And so, but there's a lot of, I think, corporate support, franchisor level support that we would like to do differently, including, starting with ourselves, starting with business coaches, right? And strategy from launching to sort of past $1 million, past $2 million, other offices, hiring, scaling, those sorts of things, getting into different product categories or bigger, commercial sort of projects. Those are big opportunities for us. Gordon, you want to weigh in on a few more?
Yeah, I mean, we do have the experience of having, 10 years of trial and error under our belt in a previous system. And, it was a new industry and a system that hadn't been done before. So there absolutely was that. To everybody's credit, we did some things that didn't go the way we wanted to and spent money on things that we shouldn't have. And you learn a lot of things along the way. So, one of the things we're working towards is, with that in our arsenal of things that we know, we're trying to get our system through a learning curve and get our owners through a learning curve much quicker than any of these other systems that kind of evolved over, 8, 9, 10, 12 years. We're going to be coming out of the gate with a lot of those best practices and even a lot of systems that they don't have today. They're stuck with some legacy kind of infrastructure and systems and just operations that we would have loved to have had differently, but we already had it up and going and had owners using it and already spent a lot of money on it. So, we have the luxury now of building things from scratch the way we would have wanted to see it all along, but couldn't do it in the past. So, there's a lot of, are we the new people in the industry? I don't know. We've all been here 10 years or more. When you look at kind of the other systems that are out there, the leadership has been there for 2 weeks to 18 months. That's what they've got. So they're way more so learning the industry and the ins and outs of the businesses than what we've got going on. So we should be able to close the gap pretty fast with, some of the systems that are out there that are more established and have a head start in some regards, but not when it comes to experience and the type of system and infrastructure we're going to have in place.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I can see a lot of advantages in what you guys are doing and how you're building this. If you're finding today's conversation valuable, I'd like to offer you my free guide, the Franchise Fit Playbook, a champion's guide to choosing the right business. This comprehensive resource walks you through the exact process I use with my coaching clients to identify their perfect franchise match. Download it for free at athletetoowner.com/playbook. You'll find the link in the show notes. Now, let's get back to our show. Tell me what does an ideal candidate look like for you guys? We really strive on having high performers, right? And educating people on how to be high performers. And so what does that look like in your system? And you guys were the high performers in the previous business. So what does that look like?
The thing that we're a little bit different than, most franchise systems in general is, this isn't a passive opportunity to get involved with a business. We are strongly, basically requiring owners to be active owners in the business. This is your career. This is your 100% full-time day job. And the reason why is we know that's what creates success. We know from a fact that, me as an owner walking in to have a discussion in a customer's home about a $20,000 product, that's going to go a lot better. They're going to have a lot more comfort with that situation. There's a certain level of respect there when they know they've got the owner in that household, talking to them, and that they could reach out when they need to the top person in that organization. So we are going to require our owners to be active. And that's, one thing that, will limit the pool overall, but in the long run, it'll make for a bigger, better system. But, the backgrounds are varied. There's a lot of folks who, like us, had the corporate structure background, working at big firms, decided they wanted something different and just wanted to get in something that's worked. We've had people in medical, pharmaceutical sales that works, a background of construction works, people who are used to running projects and doing installation and getting a little bit technical. That's very beneficial. So, you can pull from a lot of different areas, and we can actually kind of tailor what that support looks like. The person, and we've got a couple right now that are, opposite ends. We've got one group that has a heavy business background, but he's not as much on the technical side. He's not a contractor or understands that. We've got another gentleman who is a contractor, and maybe we're going to spend more time helping him with the business aspects of growing the franchise. So we don't necessarily have an absolute profile of what that looked like. We can work with a lot of different individuals. What we like to see is somebody who's going to make this their full-time business and career, who wants to build a large business, not a mediocre business where they just cover their neighborhood or a 5-mile radius, because you see that a lot. And, honestly, it also helps to have people who understand why we do what we do and maybe has a personal story in their background, like we did with my father. And, Dave has had some situations and some injuries in his personal life too, that he's got a connection to this. People who get the importance of the work that we do tend to do a lot better in this business because they care more and they look at that customer and that looks just like their own grandmother, and they absolutely remember the struggles that she went through, and they want to do what they can to make it better. So we call that the why when we're interviewing candidates. Do they have the money? Sure, you need to know that. Do they have kind of the skill and decision-making process to start and own and operate a business? Yeah. But I also want to see the why. I want to see that they actually care about the end user and the types of products we're putting in.
Yep. That's incredibly important. Having that purpose, understanding the why, and the impact that you're having on those end clients that you're serving. For anyone else, for anyone out there that is considering franchise ownership, what tips do you have for them?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, honestly, it's not something you rush into. There's a lot of folks who maybe they're just looking for an immediate escape because they hate their current job, or maybe they've recently been laid off, or something has happened in their life, and now they're kind of considering this life-changing scenario of, I want to be a business owner. Don't jump into a business because you're trying to escape your current job or situation. Put a little more thought and planning into that, as opposed, and find kind of what's the right opportunity out there. And a lot of things go into what is the right opportunity, from, do you like the work, to can it pay your bills, and a variety of other things. So that's what I would say. I mean, we see a lot of candidates who are just looking to run away from something else. Not necessarily they want a business. They just at that moment think they need a business. And that may not be the right scenario.
I think another thing that, we talk to candidates about sometimes is, what type of franchise you want. Not just the industry or, the employee profile, how many employees and that sort of thing, but how serious of a playbook do you want? Do you want the McDonald's that's telling you where to buy the napkins, or do you want a little bit more freedom than that? So for us, like a lot of business owners or corporate, employees before, we like the idea of a franchise because we sort of like the guardrails. We like, a little bit of guidance. We like the systems and the support that come with it, that you don't have to start from scratch on your own. But at the same time, we do want some freedom to run our own business and ultimately make decisions. And so, I would say Liftology, for example, is more suited to you still making decisions, for yourself, what you want for your business, how you want to scale. We can provide a lot of support, a lot of systems, a lot of guidance and strategy. But at the end of the day, no two locations are going to be a cookie cutter business, like a McDonald's franchise or something like that. And so I do think there's a big difference there of, like, how tight do you want those guardrails, or do you want a little bit of flexibility, and how entrepreneurial do you want to be in your business?
Yeah. I think that's a big differentiator in more established brands like a McDonald's, and you have thousands and thousands and thousands of locations, and everything is very much spelled out for you exactly how to do everything, versus an emerging brand where you have a little bit more freedom, it's a little bit more of a collaborative environment. And maybe for someone that's a bit more on the entrepreneurial side might appreciate that route a little more so.
It is. We had 4 different offices in 3 states. Every one of those offices had a different product that was the dominant product for that offices. And these offices were, 150, 200 miles apart from each other. These aren't like opposite ends of the country, but it is a scenario where, you've got a bag of tricks and you've got a bunch of products that you can sell, but what is going to be the winner in your market? We've got to go figure it out. It's going to be different for every single scenario. And Jen and I certainly help with that, but there's not just a blanket answer. You turn the sign on and unlock the door and people come in and this starts to happen. You do have to kind of understand your own local market and the industry there, and figure it out and zig and zag a little bit to figure out where you're going to fit in that landscape.
I love that. You definitely need to take into account the local market where you're at, and there's going to be some element of problem solving and, investigation, I think, for every franchisee in this type of business. So it's a great point.
I think that, a successful owner probably in a system such as ours is a collaborative owner, like you mentioned. It's not somebody that's just waiting, for us to feed everything to them and do everything for them, as a franchisor. It's the owner that has ideas, has thoughts and wants to collaborate, strategize, bounce things back and forth with us, based on our experience, but that are thinking for themselves, for their own business and their own market, and not just sitting and waiting, for everything to come straight to them. I think those are always probably the successful owners, but
Yeah.
I think so for sure. Gordon, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking back, you're talking about what should you warn, individuals about, and you have to have some realistic expectations of what a new business is. It's not you open the doors, at least in our scenario with our type of business, it's not you open the doors and you work it for 2 months and you hire a manager and then you go sit on a beach and collect a check. We absolutely had some people in our past systems who thought that was the scenario. This was the retirement plan for them of open a business, work it for a handful of months, and then move out of state and, just collect money. And it's not that. I mean, there's certain businesses that can be passive like that. A business like ours that's very customer focused with a long-term relationship with that customer, we're trying to sell them product now, absolutely. But I want them 3 years from now, 5 years from now, when that situation progresses in their home and now they need more equipment, bigger equipment, or we've got to figure something else out. So you have to kind of be a hands-on owner, but, it starts with having a realistic expectation of what business ownership is. When we get candidates who call us and say, I'm thinking about business ownership because I would love to spend a lot more time, with my children who are young and things like that, I would honestly say this may not be the right opportunity for you. This isn't that type of business. If at 2:00 you have to be, in the carpool line or taking kids to practices, like this is definitely a 9 to 5 type of operation, if not more than that, and also including, kind of weekend work. So, really look at that scenario as somebody's out there looking at different industries and businesses. There are certain businesses that are not 100%, family friendly, I guess is one way you could put it. You've got to get in, and they are, when you scale them and build a team, absolutely, those kind of benefits come into play. But, if you're talking about the first year or 2 or 3, that may not be on the table if you're really trying to be serious about building a large operation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a clear distinction there is the whole idea of, wanting to control your time, which is why a lot of people get into business. And that's just, at least the number of hours that you're working in the first year or 2 is going to be a lot more for sure. And having to build that team out as you scale and grow. And that's what's going to provide you with the ability to work fewer hours potentially and control your time more, is having the team in place and having those things established. But that's not going to happen right away.
It isn't. And you can't even kind of schedule your day fully. And this is a good thing. When you're selling equipment that starts at $4,000 or $5,000 and can be $50,000, every single phone call that comes into your office is important, and you want to jump on that call. So, while I may come into the office with a handful of things on my list that I would like to get done today, if that phone rings and somebody's serious about moving forward with something, you better believe I'm getting in the car and getting over there to talk to him about it. So my day just changed in the last 15 minutes by that one phone call coming in. So there is a bit of randomness to it, or even chaos sometimes, of you have to kind of handle the customers first, and the things that maybe were on your list to start the day, maybe that's what gets pushed to 7:00 tonight, or on Saturday, you're catching up on the office side of the work. So you can somewhat control parts of your schedule, but the customers are going to dictate a bigger piece of your schedule if you're in a customer-facing business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. And I think this is one of those things that differentiates, high performers from those that aren't, is this attention to the clients and, doing what you need to do at some point to serve them and especially like you said, in an industry like this where the average ticket size is so much higher, any one client can change your numbers significantly.
They can change your
Yeah.
quarter. Some of these can get big enough. So they're all important, but you have to be aware of that getting into this. There is a little bit of night and weekend component to this if you're doing a good job. Your competitors are not doing as good of a job and, maybe not handling those customers the way they should. That's easy for us. We're going to win. We're going to be the ones who answer the phone or takes the weekend appointment. So
Love it. Love it. Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you guys. Really enjoyed learning about your past, your successes, and what you're doing now with Liftology. I know you guys are going to kill it out there. So thank you so much for joining me today, and congrats on being a franchise champion.
thank you. We appreciate you having us.
Great to visit with you.
If you find value in my content, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a rating wherever you're listening or watching. Or if you have suggestions for topics or improvements, shoot me a message directly. Your support means a lot to me. Thanks for listening to the Franchise Champion Show. I'm Alan Regala, and I'll see you next week.